Good afternoon. Welcome back from lunch. My name is Ryan Smolar. I'm here from America, well, from the United States, at an organization called Placemaking US. I'm super excited to introduce the next panel, which is about the art of city building. And I think it's really interesting because as you go to different contexts like the US or Canada or over to Europe or Asia, the different roles that art and artists play in the building of cities. I would say that in the United States right now, there's a big divide between the natural art scenes, the community art scenes, the creatives that are working in their cities, and the infrastructure that's often there, and the funding structures that are there to support the arts, which end up being often much more bigger, visitor-oriented, and commercial activities. When you go over to Europe and talk to them about creative placemaking, they like to talk mostly about restoring old industrial areas into spaces for creative and digital workers. And so I'm very interested to hear today what the perspective and hot topics are here in Canada. So without further ado, let's get our moderator up here in our next panel and start off our afternoon with the art of city building.
My name is Kate MacDonald, and I'll be your moderator for today. When I think, okay, well, first, let's start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from unceded, unsurrendered Mi'kmaq territory. And that feels really important today to remember and to center in all of our conversations about building anything. We have to start with the land and the people who have stewarded this land for time immemorial. And I would be remiss to not mention that being raised here on this territory has informed so much of my life and the way I see the world. And like I said, my name is Kate MacDonald. Some of y'all probably know me from around. I'm a few places. So when thinking though about the art in city building, I think about whose voices are centered. I think about whose stories are being told. I think about art as taking space, making commentary, and as memory of what we want to be talking about down the line. And as we were being introduced, I just heard placemaking quickly. And I guess the art asks us the question of whose place is this? And that's why I'm here. That's what I'm interested in. That's what I want to get into. Whose place is this? And whose stories are we telling? And as someone who's African Nova Scotian, those questions are on the top of my mind regularly. You know, how do I show up here? How am I seen here, reflected? How are my folks remembered and commemorated? That being said, we have an incredible lineup today. So I'm just going to run through who's here with us and who'll be speaking, and then I'll introduce the first speaker and we'll get to it. So we have Shannon Monk with us, who is the CEO of Sakate Global and the Mi'kmaq Cultural Tourism Project Manager at KMKNO Mi'kmaq Rights Initiative. We have Margot Durling, who is a multidisciplinary artist as well as the creative director at Fathom Studios. We have Christine Hempel, who's an urban designer with Hempel Design Group. We have Ray Gracewood, who is the president of Area 506. And we have Meghan Morrison, a senior consultant in leadership development with the government of New Brunswick, as well as festival chair at Harvest Music Festival. That's us. That's all of us. And to open us up, I would love to invite Shannon Monk to share their thoughts with us.
Wajegwe, Sananten and Bakanjen and Deluisi. Medangaming Egumina Migmagi in Donjaba, Maingonegamun Egumina Megazain Totem. I just introduced myself in 3 different languages, representing kind of who I am. You heard a little bit of Mi'kmaq, representing my Mi'kmaq roots from Lennox Island in PEI. And a little bit of English. You'll hear a lot more English from my Celtic roots from the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. and Anishinaabe language. I'm a member of St. Teresa Point First Nation. You may be familiar more with Oji Cree from northern Manitoba. And I said I was part of the Wolf Clan in my introduction. I just wanted to give a shout out to our musicians that we had over lunch. They were absolutely amazing. I loved it so much. And I really wanted to thank everyone for inviting me here today. And I wanted to make one little clarification from this morning. I heard a couple of times a little bit of a mix-up between Mi'kmaq and Mi'kmaq. So Mi'kmaq, the gi on the end, is the land, the ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq, the people. So in case anyone needs to know that. As mentioned, I work with Kwil Mookmaq Kluzawagan, the Mi'kmaq Rights Initiative, and we work under the direction of the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs. I was hired in 2020, just at the beginning of the pandemic, to help to advance the cultural tourism strategy for the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia. So as we're talking about the art of city building, I'll be bringing in specifically a Mi'kmaq and First Nations perspective. So let's start off with some fun. Does anyone recognize any of these buildings? Yes? Which one do you see? Down here? Yeah, Thunderbird Healing Lodge, yeah, in Winnipeg. Yeah, Natural Museum of History in Gatineau, Quebec. Anything else? Anyone else? Pretty good. We have the Winooskwan Cultural Center in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. My First Nations school, St. Teresa Point First Nation School. Here we have the BC Airport. In the middle here, we have the Kingston Indigenous Food Sovereignty Garden. Here we have the Sky River Trail from Owegama First Nation, and the Blackfoot Cultural Center in Calgary, Alberta. Okay, second question. What do you think these images have in common? Don't be shy, shout it out. Some of their shapes, yes? Reaching up, yes, skyward, great. Anything else? Okay. Well, these are all Indigenous buildings. And so what, the first element is that they're all visually Indigenous through their architecture and through their land use and the visual arts within. They're also a celebration of Indigenous language and culture. So in their various forms, whether you're learning, whether you're teaching, or whether you're sharing that language and culture. They've all been co-developed through relationship and partnership. And through that co-development, there has been a respect for community and for protocols. All of those spaces are accessible for the general public and for community. And so I wanted to show these as examples of inspiration for us when we're thinking about what possibilities lie in the art of city building. And I share them with you because these spaces are still the anomaly, that we still have huge challenges within Canada. And so I can't really talk about the art of city building without also sharing the truth, right? The truth of truth and reconciliation. And we know that we have great discrepancies and disparities in Canada. Canada is 6th on the Human Wellness, Global Wellness Index, but First Nations are 63rd on that same index. So I have to bring this to your attention because in order to engage with First Nations, with Indigenous communities, we need to know how to address the fear and mistrust. And a lot of times people will say, well, I'm trying to engage with First Nations, but nobody shows up. Why don't they show up? We need to dig deeper so that we can start to heal the past and create a future that has some of those elements we just shared in those spaces. So I want to share with you today, very quickly in the time I have, the Indigenous Circle approach to cultural confidence as a framework for reconciliation that's needed as the art for creating beautiful spaces. So creating space is the first within the circle, and it's about taking the time to think about the spaces that we have created in our personal and our professional lives. And as we've heard in the opening with Kate, she talked about the traditional territory. And so when you think about the territories that you live on, do you know whose traditional territory you are a part of? And do you see visible signs of indigeneity within your spaces? Do you perhaps carry any cultural stereotypes that you need to own and you need to explore? This, if you see these visual images in front of you, it is a beautiful awareness campaign called Perception. And if you haven't had a chance to see that before, I invite you to check that out on Google. Creating space means really exploring what it means to be vulnerable and to talk about things like privilege. The second piece in the circle is Indigenous history and context. We need to know the truth. We know that we all grew up with a really one-sided view of Canada's history. And so in order for us to be able to build those relationships and to create those beautiful spaces, we need to know why there's hesitancy and why there's distrust. Learning about the treaty processes, learning about the Indian Act, learning about assimilation, learning about residential schools, because we have impacts that are manifested in our communities today. The third, relationship building and protocol. So you start to open up your heart. You're learning a little bit more about the history. You're like, okay, I can do this. I'm going to go out and start to build relationships. But it's a process, isn't it? So the first step is researching, well, who are my neighbors? Who's in my community? Am I working and living with First Nations, with Inuit, with Métis people? How do I find them? There are 5 different national Indigenous organizations. The Assembly of First Nations that supports First Nations across this country, 634 First Nations. The Métis National Council, the Inuit Taparit Kanatami, so supporting the Inuit, the Native Women's Association of Canada, and the Congress for Aboriginal Peoples. And there's also, we call the unofficial 6th NIO, which is the Association of Friendship Centers. Those are all incredibly informative places to start your research at a national level, to find out who's regional, to find out who's local, who can I connect and have tea with. So then start connecting, start building those bridges, start understanding what it takes to build those relationships over a long period of time, understanding that it's a process. We have such commonality across Turtle Island in a lot of the cultural teachings and worldviews, but we also have a lot of diversity. And so as part of this relationship building, we can start to dive deeper into the culture and understanding community and the importance of ceremony in public spaces, in private spaces, in personal spaces, in professional spaces. Here in Nova Scotia, as I mentioned, or as was mentioned, I'm working on the cultural authenticity guidelines. So when we're talking about, who's telling those stories, it's about people within their communities telling their own stories. And we're on this journey right now as Mi'kmaq people here in Nova Scotia, because if you've landed at our airport, you probably haven't seen a lot of visible signs of Mi'kmaq people. If you've traveled through the city, you probably haven't seen a lot of signs of Mi'kmaq people. And we're looking to change that narrative and to become more engaged. But we have to do some of our own work. And because the Mi'kmaq were the original ambassadors to this land, inviting Europeans to come in and to learn how to survive and live off the land, we've had the longest period of contact and colonization. And through that process, we've lost so much of our language and our culture. So we're in this process of reclaiming what that looks like and what that means by working with elders and revitalizing the stories, revitalizing the traditions, so that we can bring it together to be part of this visible landscape and to tell our own stories. Land, language, and lifelong learning, and you certainly heard that in some of the conversations this morning, and especially Pam's passion, for that connection, that sacred connection to the land. And what we say in Indigenous communities is that land and language is our identity. It's who we are as people. And we have that sacred responsibility to be stewards of the land. And when we have that opportunity to begin to reclaim those responsibilities, it allows us to share those teachings of Naduglamink, right? The sustainability in a way that allows us to flourish now and in the future. I wanted to just very quickly identify some of the ways that we're beginning these conversations, and it's really exciting here in Nova Scotia, working with the Develop Nova Scotia team. Woo, shout out. So we've been working on Peggy's Cove and the revamp at Peggy's Cove, and you'll see if you go out now that there's some Mi'kmaq signage. And we've been talking about some of the traditional medicines that grow at Peggy's Cove and finding mechanisms and ways for our harvesters and our traditional medicine people to be able to still have access to the traditional plants in that area. Another initiative is the Unama'ki Seawall Trail, and that's been under development for quite a few years, and it's really exciting because it's going to be a hiker's paradise, being able to hike all along the seacoast in Cape Breton. But we've brought in an elders advisory to help to guide us. We have the Western research around the plants and the animals and sustainability, but we've brought in the elders to be able to share those stories and that traditional knowledge from that two-eyed seeing perspective. And of course, on the Halifax waterfront, we're still in the process of developing some places for people to be able to purchase authentic goods, products and services, which is part of what we're doing again at KMKNO around the development of a Mi'kmaq brand, a Mi'kmaq logo, an authenticity logo. So pretty soon, hopefully in the next year, you'll be able to see in our stores throughout Halifax and Nova Scotia and internationally a little logo that will be attached to our products that says Mi'kmaq Dazik, made by the Mi'kmaq people. And finally, the last element within the circle, education leads to reconciliation. And I put this in the slide. In Indigenous spaces, it is difficult to separate art from politics. And if you've been paying attention to what I've been saying, now you begin to understand why the political discussion is important, because we need to have that background understanding in order to build those relationships, to work together to create beauty in our spaces. When we do that, that sense of identity and pride comes out not only in Indigenous people, but also in our neighbors, non-Indigenous brothers and sisters, so that together we feel that sense of excitement and collaboration and togetherness. The building of the relationships for us is the key, and the Mi'kmaq want to have a strong presence throughout their ancestral lands, their traditional homelands, and we're really looking forward to working together so that, as the slide says, we have economic prosperity for all. So these are the 6 elements, and I wanted to include a picture of my granddaughters, because when I think about the work that I do and that I've done for, gosh, oh my goodness, 40 years, it's a long time. It's about what we heard this morning, 7 generations, looking at the work we do now and how it impacts our future generations. And again, as Kate said, who's telling the story? We all need to tell our own stories. Whatever the culture is, whatever your community is, we need to be in charge of telling our own stories. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to the panel.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Shannon. That was brilliant, and tied in so nicely to the way I opened up, which is so beautiful. So thank you, Walalan. The next speaker that I would like to invite up to share with us is Margot Durling.
So it's a pleasure to be here with you all today in this world and on this land, especially as a white person on this land making art. It's a privilege. A shout out to all the squirrels in the room. That is anyone who's ever identified as being different, because different is not always a bad thing. Also, here's to the wisdom of young dreamers, artists, and creative spirits. I think that we are not always celebrated at a young age, and I think that we are worth celebrating. Not all of us at a young age know that it's going to be okay. It can be hard to be in a young person's body and being different and being an artist. So if anybody's listening, it will be okay, and you can be an artist and transgender, and everything will be fine. If you believe in yourself, you can make it happen. So I want to thank my parents who are here in the audience today, who are both very strange and creative people, and always embraced and celebrated that side of me, including in our backyard. We have this whimsical spot called Durland, which is part of why I love playgrounds. So my name is Margot Durling. I'm a public artist, a multidisciplinary designer. I've got a mixed background of architecture and graphic design and music and all sorts of things. I'm a proud NASCAD grad and a creative director at Fathom Studio, which is an incredible architecture and landscape architecture and planning design studio that's in Dartmouth. We're a small business doing incredible work, really working to change systems and to break barriers and to push for a higher standard for living and wellness in our cities. So check us out. I just want to remind us all in the room that I'm human and that we're all human here together. And it's hard to public speak, and I just wanted to say that out loud. So I'm not going to be perfect here today, but I'm here as a human. This diagram is possibly the most important slide for me personally. This is something I've been trying to describe for a long time, how it feels to be a public artist. That process can be very, very personal. And the moment it becomes public, you give it over to the public. And it's a beautiful moment, and it's also a very vulnerable moment. But it is part of what is so powerful and what the privilege is of being an artist. In my early career, someone once told me that art and design are very different and that you couldn't be both. And I mean, I'm a non-binary person. I'm not a big fan of binary thinking in general. So I think you can be a lot of things. And I'm here today to talk about a few of the celebrated projects that I've had the honor of working on. So today, this is what we're really here for, is to talk about art and why art matters to cities and why we love it so much. So I'm going to talk about 4 beloved projects I had the pleasure of working on. And they're centered in different aspects of what art does for our cities. So wellness, not just from the individual, but also for our city's wellness. Healing, which is such an important one. Storytelling and place making. So what is art? What does it do for our cities? It brings us joy. This is a lovely little event that NASCAD puts on every year, and it makes art feel accessible and joyful. So I encourage you to go if you've never been. That's my mom and my nibbling Clara. Art is everywhere. One of my favorite little interventions downtown are these little roses in the art gallery. I've always loved them. It's the simplest thing, but they just add that little pop of color. And same with this little gritty to pretty intervention that happened downtown. Art also has the power to connect us when we can't gather. So this was a project funded by our local developer, Killam, in partnership with the Mental Health Foundation, and it was right in the midst of COVID during the holidays when we couldn't get together. We took these historic windows from the St. John's Market and rebuilt an open hearth for people to gather around, but by themselves. And I heard some really beautiful stories after the holidays, people connecting in this space. Art also stirs the human spirit across borders. This is a special photo from time in Switzerland with my mom. I'll never forget this moment. It kind of caught me off guard about what art can be, but it's just this lion. He's just carved into the wall. But my mom turned that corner, and as an individual, it hit her in a really big way, and she just started weeping. And she will never forget that moment, and I will never forget that moment because it affected her in a different way than it affected me. Art gives voice to community for healing. On the left, we see a recent artist, a musician we lost, Pat Stay. The community went out 2 or 3 days later and had this painted massively in Dartmouth. Also, our park in memorial of Raymond Tavel has these lovely little handmade candles marking his life. Art can also actually highlight disparities in our communities. So even when it's very well intended and when there is some funding put towards art, when the process is not put in place and there's no thought putting into keeping that art in place, then sometimes it can highlight those disparities. Ultimately, art begins with seeing yourself reflected in the built environment. I'm very proud that I've had the chance to work on the branding and also some of the architecture with Fathom on the bottom left for Kesh and Goodman. But our central library and our series of libraries are wonderful examples of how everyone is welcome and it's a space for all. So to that point, I love this book. If you haven't checked it out, it's called Mismatch by Kat Holmes. And really designing for inclusion starts with recognizing exclusion. So I think that's an important starting point. So now I'm going to talk about my art and why I do what I do. So the first one is art and wellness. And for this one, I'm going to focus on my piece on the Halifax Commons, Chosen Family. So art really brings vitality to our cities, and not just color, but like I said, it brings actually life to people. Speaking as someone who grew up trans and queer and did not have the visual signifiers to let me know that it was safe to be me, this kind of thing would have made such a difference for me growing up. So this kind of art can create a huge sense of safety and belonging. It can help to share knowledge. Many people are now understanding that there's more than 2 genders and that there's more than 2 symbols for that, and that there are more stories to tell than just one. This piece actually represents more than our queer community. It also represents families and how we look different these days. We don't necessarily all look the same. So there's a bigger conversation there. Art and history can be a really neat thing. A lot of people don't know this, but Chosen Family was inspired by some of these little marks that were on the original letterhead for the Gay Alliance for Equity. So like I said, a lot of people are learning about our community because of this art. And just in the last year, it has traveled to Ottawa, to the nation's capital, and is now in an animated form on the National Arts Centre. And I was so happy to see it come to life in this way, because I was able to talk to activism, to dance floors, to relationships coming together, coming apart. So it was able to tell more of a story. Interrupting spaces with queerness is a really big one. I think that I put that in quotes because it shouldn't be an interruption. A world without art is hard to really imagine. It's so funny to see these naked babies up there like that, but really what art does, it tells us that we belong. It's human nature to need that safety and belonging. Placemaking is safe-making, and this is why it matters. This is a drawing that was given to me by a young trans community member. And this is one of many, many messages I've received from a family that helped them to tell that story. I'm running out of time. I'm so sorry. The second project I wanted to talk about was art and healing. And this was a massive opportunity I got the chance to work on with a huge group of people for the LGBTQ National Monument in Ottawa. Fathom was selected as the top 5. And we were selected as the second place winner. I wish we could have brought you home the gold, but this concept got us in second place. And this was very much a living monument, carving safe space for our community. The process had collaboration and healing. The concept was about changing how we look at one another through a lens, and seeing the beauty in our differences. It was about carving space and making that space for healing. A huge part of it was about resistance, and that our community continues to rise up. And then the ripples of the global impact that we hoped this monument would have were laid out in the berms and the grasses. There was huge amount of interpretive and moments for special solace. Looking outward, the lens acknowledges that we have always existed within the monuments and institutions that surround us. In the daytime, we wear our armor, and at night, we show our true colors, which is a duality built on survival. This monument was less artifact and more action, a safe space for our community and a precedent for the world. Rewind, the Halifax I grew up in versus the Shipuktuk we're living in today are very different. We are seeing change happen. People are speaking out about how our statues and monuments need to change. This is the public art that I grew up in. I don't know if you can see a consistency there. This is the public art that we're seeing today. There's a huge difference happening. This is the support that the public art needs. We need big change. We need joyful access to public space. We need art integrated into our infrastructure from the beginning. We need to challenge the status quo. Again, talking to Pam and what she was so passionate about this morning. Rethinking what is radical change. That's not so radical. We need to think about art as more than just an afterthought. We need to provide our artists with better process, better quality materials. We need to invest more and change the barriers to access the art, and also to the artists that are trying to access the art. Art and story, I wanted to just speak quickly about these 2 murals that recently went up in Dartmouth that are starting to enrich the stories of our queer community in Dartmouth. This also changes the economic viability of our community. Businesses are thriving in downtown right now. Art is everywhere, everyone. It's everywhere. Sometimes it's funded corporately. Sometimes it's people in your studio making really cool street art. Sometimes it's people just taking the time to make a nice sign. Humans need to say something, and they need to feel heard. And we see it on our streets. Our streets have the best public art, if you ask me. If you want to know what our communities are saying, look to our streets. The city speaks for itself. This is some of the most important messaging that we could hear today. Developments are ripe with opportunity for public art. This is up to developers and also up to the city to leverage those positions of power to create that vibrancy and economic viability for our cities. And that begins with being accountable. Our cities are longing for so much more, so much more. Our cities have a spirit. Our cities have a soul. This is the press block building that we're working on at Fathom downtown right now with Dexel. Cities carry memories and history. This is the work we did up at the Fort Needham Memorial Park. It's time to rewrite that history. On the corner of King and Queen, I asked, what is our queen? What is our king? And the timing of that is funny for today, but our early decks had no queens in them. And so rewriting that narrative of what a queen is, could a queen be masculine? Could a king be feminine? And then providing our community with those symbols, those references to say, it's okay, I see myself up there, I can be in this space. And there's a lot of subversive messaging in there too that only would be familiar to our community within both of these murals. There's also celebration and connection with community gathering afterwards. And my last project I wanted to talk about was art and placemaking for the word murals in Dartmouth. Again, it was during COVID. Businesses, small, beautiful, tiny, lovely businesses in Dartmouth were struggling so much. And downtown Dartmouth came to us and said, how can you help? So we got foot traffic on the street by releasing, I believe, 17 murals. They were so lo-fi. This was a low-budget project, had a huge impact. It won an Urban Design Award. It universally landed with everyone. I think these are messages we all needed to hear. And it was a very, very successful campaign. People are still wearing these t-shirts proudly around the city. And there's been a wonderful assortment of social media posts. One of them happens to be featuring lassie dogs. As with all art, some stays forever and some goes. And this is the perfect way to end my presentation. To keep your head up. And the thing to remember in all of this is with all these themes, art can build community resilience. And that is hopefully the goal of it all. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Margot. Something that really resonated with me was the Halifax that we grew up in versus the Chipuktuk that exists today. And we are the folks championing how the city is going to look moving forward. So thank you so much for bringing those pieces to us. The next person I would like to invite to share with us today is Christine Hempel.
Hi, just while I'm waiting for the slides, I'm Christine Hempel, and I'm here as an artist in residence with the Halifax Library, doing a project that'll extend over the year. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is how I've been playing with Lego to kickstart community design conversations. So the theme of the project of this residency, I proposed this project, was live well together and play well together. And at the root of what I proposed to do was bring an exhibition that I had previously created that is intended to both teach and to bring forward other people's notions of what a sustainable city might be. It's an imaginary city, but it's out in the hall, and there's many elements in here. There's a deck of cards. You can see all kinds of little vignettes and scenarios that show what I mean, we can use terms like walkable, but also balanced in terms of the setting that it's in the landscape. And this was rooted in some of the theories that I have learned and also taught, but trying to think of a very playful and engaging way of getting those messages out, either quickly or in a long visit with the public in a library setting. And then wondering how to take that and bring the knowledge sharing component that this can facilitate in a community setting. And so partly at the library, I'm going to be working with staff. I've worked with staff and also with casual visitors to talk about some of the ideas that are embedded in the short form, the eco-city. And then in turn, those staff members or even members of the public become a little bit like tour guides of it. They start to talk to other people, and they can also help in some of the building workshops that we're doing. So there's this idea of kind of growing the knowledge base around some of the fundamentals about ecological city building. And I also have a kind of big kit of parts, playful parts to do workshops with. And these are designed to be either for free play with families, people of all ages, anybody, or a bit of structure. And the structure, sometimes people don't know quite where to start. And so in this case, I designed a number of scenarios that have some problems. On the left side, you can see there's a highway that kind of dams up a little stream. A snake's about to get hit. And then there's a woodland on either side of it where there's little animal figures and they can't cross. And then people who drop into a workshop have a chance to kind of take that apart and do something about it. This is one of the solutions from here at Halifax Central. You can see they've made a bridge over the creek and a crossing for pedestrians, a bridge between the two wildlife areas. I think there's a picnic spot on top. There's all kinds of imaginative things that were done mainly by kids. Often the parents sit down with us because the kids want to stay a long time, so eventually we end up with a larger conversation about these. And at these workshops, often people just want to build their own spaceships and they sit down and do what they want, so they're really quite fun. The one on the, I was thinking of Jonathan with this because this is an apartment building where there's a really big Lego lawn mowing team, and we kind of talk about some of those ideas about how where we live, our balconies, our rooftops, our backyards, how could those be a little bit more resilient? But out at Woodlawn, I was just out at the Woodlawn branch for a 4-week program, and in this case, I thought that I had started to learn an awful lot about the actual place, the neighborhood where the library was sitting. And there seemed to be, beyond these more abstract lessons, an opportunity to kind of reflect on exactly where are we here. So initially I brought a smaller map, just to the regular workshop setting. Some kids were working on the apartment building, and other people would come and reflect on the environment that we had and start to build creations that, as I get into it and show you, they look playful, they might even look a bit silly, but they're actually so thoughtful. Oh. That's a video. We probably don't have time for that. That was a person explaining what they were doing. I just love hearing people's explanations. So I think of this process in a way, as I was going through it, almost like a slow design charrette process, which is by, small conversations. You start learning about what's going on in the city. I'm a newcomer to Halifax, and so by engaging in these conversations over this map and with this Lego and with this imaginary city, I start hearing about concerns. In Dartmouth, there's a wetland that was recently, is currently probably having its trees removed for a new subdivision. And one of the visitors to the library had said that there had been a spotting of a Canada warbler. I don't know whether that has been verified, but it started to get me very interested in what's relevant to the local community, to learn a little bit about Dartmouth. and also to take a spotlight on the actual setting of the library itself, which is quite fascinating for urban planners. It's the circle on the map on the right shows it. I've highlighted some of the ecological systems. This is Russell Lake, just to the west, and there's a lovely trail system. But the photo shows how these connections between these ecosystems are not made in a particularly either inviting or resilient or healthy way. There's this barrier of roads, and all of this I'm kind of learning as I go and as I walk around the site. This is why I wanted the pointer. I don't have a car, so on the bus, you can see the map on the left shows the bus route, and it takes a bend, but that's how they suggest you do it. That's not how people do it. This is the Woodlawn Library site here. That's the Woodlawn Library, and here's where the bus lets you off. So what happens is people kind of traverse across the grassy median, and then they kind of try to get to where they're going, but there's this big, huge, mysterious black fence that you have to kind of wind your way around. Across the road here, you can see there's little lines in the grass where people have trod a path, and then up a curb, which is like crazy. This fellow has some mobility issues, and he's stumbling up this curb. And if you make it that far, you get to kind of wander across the concrete wasteland to get to where you're going. So as a newcomer, I have fresh eyes. I think, like, why is that fence there? But people who are used to it just go around it because presumably it's just there. And I have these questions about this whole library environment. Why is there so much parking? You know, do we need it all? Do you need it all? I never saw a car there, and in all the history of the aerial photos and the maps from all the past 6 or 10 years, there's never been a car there. So clearly there's a lot of pavement. And then just looking at the library itself, I really love this library because it's an adaptive reuse of what used to be a theater building. So they brought a really great community hub and a new purpose to a building that was no longer, you know, functioning economically. And it's very lively. People are there all the time. But as a movie theater, they're very internally focused. And they don't need a lot of windows, so the library is still like that. And so the front of it has some nice glazing, but just walking around the back of the library, you can see there's no windows, no real entrances, and then, so there's no way for people to connect to that lovely natural woodland that's at the back of it that has streams, marshes, and forests. And I was told it was there by one of the people who works there, otherwise I never would have wandered around to the back parking lot even to find it. So people are living there. Dartmouth isn't escaping the housing crisis. Those folks are living out of their car in the back parking lot. I also had a look at the zoning, which is 1992 era zoning, I'm sure, or maybe even later, but it's all commercial. So right now, even if you wanted to do something with the property, you'd face the woes that Hussam was talking about earlier, of, you know, years and years of trying to get people to allow you to do something like build affordable housing. So I thought instead of just doing the open workshops that I would do something a little more focused. And the kind of themes that were occurring to me as I spent a little bit of time in this neighborhood was that there was all kinds of things to talk about, kind of on a serious level. You know, we've got the shopping environment itself, affordable housing, there's an issue. That's the reason that Clayton Developments got permission to take down this wetland, was because they promised them affordable housing. And there's clearly an opportunity to do something about those ecological connections. There's excessive parking, buildings that aren't being used properly, and the surroundings right from the building outwards. Pedestrian experiences, which I'd experienced, they're a little bit difficult, and the transit, those buses are full. So it looked pretty rich for a workshop. So on a Saturday, we planned a larger event than usual. Instead of just me sitting at the tables with a box of Lego, I had invited some other people that I just met who are part of a Lego building community, people who love to build Lego and really know their way around the bricks, and they came out to help. And I invited a friend of mine who's a planner and a landscape architect just to kind of come and be with me to kind of bolster the group, which is lucky because we did end up having a really big turnout. We had about 70 people come out. The first part of the workshop was a little more serious. It started with a tour of the eco-city model, and this is a kind of a tried and true method in community building, which is you try to get on the same page with principles. What are we trying to do ultimately when we're building a community space, whether it's a suburban neighborhood or a whole new city or retrofitting just a tiny little corner? Can we agree that we are going to be responsible to the landscape, and what are we aiming for? And the model is a good place to sit and talk about that because you can kind of reflect on it, and there's little things also that are inspiring and trigger the imagination about what you might want to do. And then we did a guided site walk, right? Traipsing around to the beautiful parts of the neighborhood, but also to the traffic woes and the parking lot curiosities. And then I laid out some tables and this map, and I hardly got everything kind of laid out before we had all kinds of kids come. And some had come with us on the tour and were really engaged in that part of it, and others just wanted to come to the playtime. And we also had adults, planners, professionals. I think they were sort of in disguise bringing their kids. But what that allowed us to do was to imagine these ideas in a playful way. And this is where the art method is so wonderful, because with Lego, sometimes the adults don't even really know what they're doing very well. They don't really know how to build. They're new to it. But kids can be actually fabulous little builders. And so who knows the most? Who's in charge of what gets built? This is all turned on its head. The other thing I like about working with kids is that the whole reason we're doing this, we have to remember that we're thinking about what the kids are going to grow into, and they remind us about what the animals are doing, and they're not here making these policy decisions. So as citizens, when you're building with kids, you're rooted in thinking about the future in ways that you're not when you're just advocating for some policy that affects you in the moment. So as the day wore on, we had a couple people working on their own tables, on their own creations, and some people took spots on the floor. It was very much like a kind of a family day, but gradually the site started to evolve here. And I had scheduled it for a 3-hour playtime build in the afternoon, and then we were starting to run out of time until the library was going to close. We got kind of hustled out of there, and so the next day I went back to take photographs because I didn't even have enough time to kind of document what we'd done. And so this is the creation that we made on top of the map. And then there were all these little side commentaries and pieces, and some of them are really, when you look at the ideas in them, they're so interesting. I'm hoping to take you through some of them. I also had a map up there for people to add additional, this is more traditional urban planner style. It was not as populated, but the ideas are still there. People found it important to go and take pictures of things or to comment on something that they felt should change. So zeroing in on the details of this creation, so as colorful as things are, there's actually some really good precedent for some of these ideas. I love it. So this one was a bit inspired by the model, but clearly to almost all the kids there that the road that cut off the ecosystems from each other had to go. So a bridge was made and the stream widened out. But this is a little deer, a little oversized, and the scales are all mixed up. But that doesn't really matter because it's not about it's not Lego Masters, it's not the final product, it's the ideas that they're talking about. So this ecosystem connects here under this bridge. This is a seniors' home that's right next door, which realized that the seniors had to kind of leap across this busy boulevard if they were to go over and enjoy the lake. And I love this, Margot, I'd love to see what you could do with some street crossings, but the idea of what if we just have different colors in these little tiles of beautifully painted speed bumps, just an awareness that the cars are not the only thing that road is for. And just this is sort of showing you how delightfully intricate some of the landscape that you see from a distance. Every bit of that got kind of worked on by mostly kids in that section. In looking at the big box, there's an Atlantic Superstore there, which is great. Actually, all of the pieces that are there for great suburban center. There's a pharmacy and a bank and a Second Cup and a Winners and a Superstore and this library. But there's an awful lot of roof, and that was really evident to everybody who visited. And we had all kinds of opportunities and suggestions for that roof, from growing food on top of a parking garage. This is just a lovely, playful landscape that's built on top of the roof. This is the beginnings of, we got interrupted by the library closing, but this is a greenhouse connecting to the supermarket that opens up onto rooftop food growing opportunities, a sort of economic engine. This is a small housing development that they figured could plunk on the top of the roof. Some solar panels installed in this building. You can see some new just canopies and green walls. And so every section of this model is loaded with these ideas. So lots of new housing types and alternatives were found and built. This one was inspired by a building that had a lot of green elements on the side and on the top. And this one had a sort of courtyard. This one was a very modest apartment building, and in front of it, that's a retail store. But in all kinds of different scales, like there's, minifigs are a different scale than these kinds of models, but you've got street trees, just loads of them, demarcating new ways of walking and providing shade and animation to the site. This is, I love this one. This is a lettuce hut and a vegetable stand and a little picnic area that got made by one of the Lego visiting fellas. But just the idea that it needs that kind of pedestrian level animation. This grocery store is if you walk along it, there's really, I would say, just zero street level animation. So we've got lots of giant bicycles and this notion of kind of cozying that street up, lining it with trees, lining it with buildings. And these ideas are actually quite sophisticated. This one is a strip taking you in a more direct way from the street through the site, creating a new entrance. This one has a different type of non-paving, permeable landscape material. And then there's new bike routes, and there were lots of talks about whether they were electric bikes or bikes that the library could rent out so that people didn't have to walk so far to the bus stop and just leave on the site. We had some traffic designers, a roundabout. This one is a car parking on a permeable kind of paving brick that lets the water go through. And this is a new bus stop located in there, ideas about that. What about just getting rid of that fence? This is a new bus circle idea. So the ideas that came out were Oh, I'm over time. Okay, so I'm going to race through lots of really good ideas for the library itself, and really amazing opening it up. I think we've got, the start of some new architecture that it kind of embraces the back, gets rid of the excess of parking, this little natural playground, and my time is up. There's going to be, I'll write a little bit more about this project, and there's more coming along on the Halifax blog site, but you can also find a little bit about me at christinehempel.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that tour of your wonderful town. I wonder, how are the rents? Just a quick check-in with folks. So we are going over time. This is a super exciting, very dense, very visually impactful panel or group of speakers. So we're going to be moving through the next two speakers, but we did eat up our panel time. So if you do have questions for your speakers, make sure and save those for the break. And I'll turn it back over to Alex or the next speaker. Thanks.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Christine, for sharing that with us and encouraging us to dream outside of and within the barriers and boundaries that are already existing within places and challenging those. The next person that I would like to welcome to share with us is Ray Gracewood.
Thank you very much. How's everybody doing? Good day? Good day so far? I've had the privilege the last couple days to spend some time in Halifax for the first time in a while, and I just wanted to say thanks to the organizers, but also to the entire city of Halifax. It's an amazing job that Halifax is in such a great spot right now, and I, for one, can say that I feel inspired kind of walking, especially down and around the waterfront, which is a little bit in and around the topic of conversation that I have to talk about. So just in terms of introduction, my name's Ray Gracewood. My background is in primarily sales and marketing, also product development. I spent a lot of time in most CPG business, so a lot of time at Moosehead Breweries and Organigram, and recently my love of marketing has gotten into the world of place branding and understanding what people look for and where they choose where to live. And for me, being a resident of St. John, New Brunswick, and my heart is very much there, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about what it is that's special about the city of St. John, living in a port city, and also sort of how we can create things that really kind of can wrap their arms around that. So just for a little bit of background, is anybody familiar with Area 506? A little bit? Yeah, okay. Well, I'll tell you what, so Area 506 started in 2016. It was a passion project that me and a small group of people brought together. And essentially, the city of St. John, if you're familiar, is known for a lot of things, and really embracing the art scene hasn't historically been one of those. So we thought it was an incredible opportunity for us to create what we consider to be a world-class event in a city that hadn't really had anything of that scale in the past. And how we did that was through the three pillars of music and culture and goods. So specifically when it comes to music and culture, that's sort of, I think, the story of Area 506 and why I've been asked to kind of walk through the evolution of that project, I think kind of taps into the idea of arts in cities and the importance of arts in cities. But also too, I think I've always thought of business as an art form. And specifically kind of within my world of marketing, I've always loved and embraced the creativity that goes into advertising and promotion and a lot of these kind of things. And that's sort of where my worlds have collided, and my interest in place branding specifically. But we started the festival in 2016. The idea started as a music festival. We wanted to create a platform for New Brunswick-based artists to come together on a big stage. We also wanted to create something that was a bit of a soapbox for locally made brands and products and things of that nature, and then also an opportunity to really kind of put a spotlight on the diversity of the province of New Brunswick and create something that really embraced the culture kind of within the province. So just a little bit of background on the aesthetic and the DNA. I've always had this interesting kind of perspective on what it is to be a port city, and I think a lot of people think about it as logistics and transportation and bringing goods in and out, but not a whole lot of creativity. And I used to look across the harbor in St. John and see these massive walls of shipping containers, and I always thought that the different colors and the vibrancy created this really kind of cool and creative thing that hadn't really been thought of in that way, at least not within the market in St. John. So the original aesthetic and the branding of the festival was to take the idea of shipping containers and not only how do we build it right into our brand, but also how do we create it as part of our festival. So every year we would bring in 50, 60, 70 shipping containers, and that would create the perimeter for our entire festival site. We'd have brands come in and they would set up, they'd open the doors, they'd all set up shop in these containers, and it was really sort of an interesting way to get people to interact with shipping containers on the waterfront, within the port, and kind of just make people think a little bit differently about how they understand living in a port city. This is an image from, I think, the last night around our very first year in 2016. So as you can tell, we all look really happy right there. We're not quite sure what we've gotten ourselves into. But at the end of the day, we've spent the last, 7 years starting to build this up in and around what is the idea of Area 506 and what can we stand for. This is an image, so fast forward to, this is July 31st of last year. This is me making an announcement. So we did 4 years of kind of a growing music festival. As everybody else did in 2020, we did a virtual event, something I never want to do again. And then in 2021, we changed the format again to create a concert series where over the course of 5 weekends, we did 10 shows and we created these pod-based structures. So again, what is it to sort of have an event on the waterfront in this sort of industrial setting with shipping containers, but we also created scaffolding-based pods. So social distancing last summer was very much still a thing. We had groups of 10 that would come in, attend the concert. They also got the sort of VIP treatment. There was no bar. Everything was remote ordering, but it was really sort of a suitable event for 2021. At that event, we made the announcement that in partnership with the Port of St. John, as well as the province of New Brunswick and the government of Canada, we were taking the idea of Area 506 as a festival, as one weekend of the year, and turning it into more of a permanent piece of product. It's a place for people to go that we call our waterfront container village. So again, this was call it late July 2021. So call it 14 months ago. We made that decision to work with those groups to create a permanent space within the St. John waterfront. So the statement that we originally came up with was all around reimagining the St. John waterfront, a reinterpretation of what it is to be a port city and creating something that people could actually interact with the port and go down, and that's where our idea of creating the shipping container village comes from. We're going to fill it with vendors and with artists, cultural groups, food trucks from all around the province and beyond, and consider it to be a version of urban cool unlike anybody's ever experienced. So that was kind of the thing that we put together to say, okay, this is what we want to do. Now, this is an image of how I would have seen the Port of St. John. And this, I'm not sure exactly when this picture was taken, but essentially it hasn't changed all that much. It's very logistically heavy. Again, back to my experience over the past couple days, the waterfront in Halifax is absolutely gorgeous, and St. John is at least a few steps behind, but at the same time, what do they say? Everything has its beauty, only certain people can see it. I see it all about potential and what we can do. So again, another image, a lot of brick, a lot of stone, a lot of concrete, not a whole lot of accessibility within the waterfront in St. John. So fast forward again. So Christine, you're gonna like this one. Guess what we used? Guess what we used to build the original rendering? My Lego. I am free to admit I'm a big Lego fan. We used Lego to build this thing originally. But in any case, we wanted to put together an idea that was kind of rooted in a few different ideas. We thought art was a hugely important kind of piece of this. We wanted it to be bright, vibrant. When people originally heard the idea of a container village, they weren't quite sure what to make of that. And it might be the first of its nature, but at the same time, container villages exist in different forms, whether it's a series of restaurants, different kind of things. But my idea was I wanted to create something that really had a really cool place for local art, for local vendors, and then also because I'm a big music fan, I wanted something that we could look at as a really marquee and cool venue for people to come in and play music. Because what I found is that, St. John is not at the top of the list of a lot of national and international artists. There's just not a reason to come out to St. John. It's not a market that they want to build, and that's unfortunate. But at the same time, we understood that through hospitality, through uniqueness of venue, doing things a little bit different, all of a sudden over the years it became a lot easier to kind of build reputation and bring acts and bring artists into the space. So we wanted to create something that was a really cool and different sort of atmosphere to people to come in and present their artwork. And so we developed this as the initial plan, and then from there, this is an overview of what our site looked like. We made that announcement in late July. If anybody knows anything about construction, asphalt plants close in early November. So we had to have the whole thing designed and right down to the fact where everything is underground. So the electrical, the conduit, all of that needs to be exactly where it is. We had all of that designed, built, and then paved in September of 2021. Then our next step was to actually do all the construction manufacturing of all the containers. We chose to do it entirely with local tradespeople. So local electricians, local carpenters, local painters, all of the welding work, everything was done right in St. John on the waterfront. This is a picture from, I think, mid-January when this is our initial meeting where we got together, all these tradespeople got together, bought into the vision, showed them what the timeline needed to be. It was a very aggressive timeline, but at the same time, a very sort of passionate group of people to come together and start to make it happen. So again, this is in January. We now fast forward to the beginning of May. In the beginning of May, we dropped 54 shipping containers in place to start to create our container village. And it happened over about a 2-week span where it really started to come to life. And although it was a bit of a sprint from a construction perspective, a lot of people, because of the nature of the containers and how relatively easy they are to work with, really were able to kind of put it together and make it happen. And then so if this is the beginning of May, we then opened our gates in June 8th of this year. And I'll show a little bit of a video just to kind of like showcase some of the, some of the events and such that have happened. But this is actually June 8th with the largest cruise ship in the world. We opened our gates with 27 different vendors. We had an entire weekend full of entertainment, everything from an outdoor film festival to a major concert featuring July Talk, and then an open house for all of the community to come in and really kind of experience the container village for the first time. So in terms of objectives, we had 6. We wanted to open on time. We wanted an engaged and curated group of vendors. So really kind of trying to figure out within the province, within the local community, what are the kind of vendors we want to have there. We want to have First Nations representation. We want to have representation from all kinds of different business industries within the local community, everything from services to tourism to locally made goods, et cetera. National exposure, so we were the host to the 2022 Memorial Cup, which just the way it worked out, we were on TSN for 12 nights in a row, which really allowed us to sort of kickstart, get a lot of national exposure. Capturing the imagination of the community, we wanted to create something that was very much multidisciplinary. There was an excuse for everybody to kind of come down and check it out, so it wasn't really specifically for one group of people, which from a marketing perspective kills me because that's the kiss of death, but at the same time it's kind of worked to really engage as many of the different groups as what we can. A jam-packed event schedule, and then lots and lots of learning. So within the first 100 days, as I mentioned, we opened successfully on June 8th, full of vendors, big first weekend, hosted the Memorial Cup, the official Canada Day celebration for the city of St. John. We had our annual Area 506 Music Festival in late July. We did a 10-show concert series between August and September. And then we've also had a whole kind of series of weekly things like family movie nights and what we call our neighborhood lock parties, where people come down and put their locks on the fence, all that kind of stuff, make kissy faces on Instagram. And it's been great. So I'll tell you, and I know that we're tight on time, so I'm going to go right into this. And sometimes talking about the summer doesn't really do it justice, so I just put a quick minute and a half video here together. I don't know if there's audio there or not. Come every year, don't come at all. Come every year, don't come at all. Been here before and watch a better man fall. I smell the beer on your boy. Come every year, don't come at all. I will put you down. I will put you down. I will put you down for king and for country. I will put you down. Thank you. So it's been a busy summer, but this is the last slide, and I'll be real quick. But really, what worked for us was capturing the imagination of people locally. I think we set out, and it's local residents, it's local tourists, and it's and also the cruise business within St. John is a big part of our target as well. But really, kind of creating a pride of place, and I think that's where St. John has got a lot of opportunity and potential, is to create more pride of place and have people within the local community putting their shoulders back, and this project has really seemed to achieve that, so I'm incredibly proud of that. And then also the element of creativity and vibrancy, and I think overachieving on expectations of what people could see as a container village versus the art that we bring to life, the music that we bring to life, the events that we host, all of those kind of things. Great public partners, private-public relationships that we have as well with some of our funding partners. Like I mentioned, very much multifaceted. The team that I work with, I can't say enough about. I think passion drives us and is really put us in a position where we want to make sure this is successful and is the first of many great projects that really starts to revolutionize the city of St. John, as well as the St. John waterfront specifically. And then also just being flexible and open and hearing feedback and knowing that this is the first year of hopefully many years. But at the end of the day, it's been a great experience for us and a great project to work on. And I just wanted to say thanks very much to everybody for hearing our story. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Ray. That was great. I also have very fond memories of being like a port city. And I think a lot of that has to do with the teaching that I was taught of water being life, and how much life and livelihood there is along the water, all year long. The next person that I would like to invite to speak, that's joining us virtually, is Meghan.
Wonderful folks. So my name is Meghan Morrison, joining here from Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I'm this year's festival chair for the Harvest Music Festival. You can tell that our event just finished because my voice is gone. We finished up packing some stuff away last night, but I'll talk more about that in a second. Our festival is really lucky to take place right beside the banks of the beautiful, beneficial Woolstic River. And that river has seen so much over the years that it's right on the unceded traditional territory of the Wolastoqiyik, and we're so lucky to be there. I'll start on here. You can see light projecting on this building in front of us. We're in temporary spaces. We happen right in the middle of downtown Fredericton. So gonna show a few images fresh from the weekend and share some stories about how we're seeing the way we use the space change and how we're doing that in collaboration with the people that are in the space. So this used to be an alley, well, not an alleyway, it's really a parking lot between two of our bigger venues that the people who wanted to get somewhere fast would take, but it didn't used to be lit at all. And from a festival perspective, we originally went from a safety angle and we're thinking maybe we have to change something here. But if you do that in a way that's beautiful and add to it, this is actually probably, 20% of the people who are at the festival this weekend. This is now their backdrop on some of their social media, right? So the way people use stuff changes it. This in the middle here is me in 2005. So I've been doing this. This is actually my 19th year volunteering with the festival. And I got into it as a way to help out a friend who needed something and ended up finding an incredible community and an incredible way to impact our community. So like nearly half of my life has been spent as a co-organizer of this festival now. And yeah, we were just wrapped up yesterday. It's so fresh, and hearing the other speakers go through, I have so many thoughts going around about what we can learn from that. We'll say though that I'm not an academic or a professional, totally volunteer. And it's interesting to think of that perspective bringing to this. So I think Harvest has always been open to change. I'll just share a little bit of some sweet images from the past here, but on the left, we have when Harvest got its first computer. This festival started in 1991. And everyone was like, this was like let's take a picture of our first super portable computer. How about on the right-hand side here, you'll see this was presenting Big Sugar way back when. This was when our biggest tent had large poles in the middle of it. We didn't really have background banners and stuff like that. There's a few things in different places. So it's interesting now looking at this and seeing what we've evolved to. But the changes are often incremental. This is going back over 20 years and feels pretty distant. But I always ask myself, what's driving our changes? How do we interact with the spaces that we're in and the people using them? So I wanted to share a quick story that kind of helps talk about that. On the right here is a dear friend of mine, Rachel Barrett. Rachel's here with her daughter Lola on her shoulders and her partner Sean. And Rachel keeps coming back, even though she now lives on the coast in Nova Scotia. She comes back every year for Harvest because it holds a really special place for her, and she runs a yoga class for us. So Harvest is about music, but it's also about any different way of incorporating that. And right beside where we do the yoga in front of City Hall, so a place that's really well known, and you can see that an artist rendering a City Hall actually on the piano. There is this little piano there that's open for the public to use. And I asked Rachel at the end of the festival, I said, what was your best Harvest moment? And she told me about this one and told me I could certainly share. While she's setting up for the yoga class, a woman comes by with her shopping cart that's got, all her possessions in it. And she drives on up and just says to Rachel, because it was clear they were doing something, would you mind if I went to play the piano? Rachel's kind of like in stress mode before getting going. And she sort of said, of course, right? This is a public piano. Of course, please go do some music, not really knowing what to expect. Well, the woman sat down and wowed everyone because, of course, in a different time in her life, she was a trained professional pianist, right? And then they started a conversation about that. And she asked, what is it you're doing here? And she said, oh, we're going to do a yoga class. And this woman said, it's been a really long time since I did yoga, but I used to do it. Would I be able to join the class? And it's just like 100%. It's for anyone who's here. And she joined the class and wasn't comfortable using something else, so wanted to kind of do it on her own in the middle, but the class formed around her because she was one of the first people there. Anyways, all this made me think of is this idea of these spaces and how we use them, and what are we creating things that are truly accessible? Are we creating things because in reality, we as the festival have moved into the space that this person is normally in. So we want to think about how we're creating an opportunity for them to feel part of it. She had a wonderful experience and thanked and said she'll be back next year if she's still around, kind of thing. But all of those stories are what kind of makes up Harvest. As I said, coming into someone else's space, we come into the downtown. There are government offices and businesses and all this stuff, and we really do invade. We take over so much parking and all this stuff. And a big piece of doing that is also recognizing that our job is then to help people understand what we're doing, how they can be involved, how they might want to connect with us. So introducing things like these how can we help signs with these wonderful university students on the left-hand side who came in this year, and they walked all through the streets, had wonderful conversations with all kinds of folks who know that something's going on but have never actually gone. On the top right, you'll see, creating spaces for dancing in the middle of the street. This is right by our public library, and the city has made it cobblestones in the last, I think, 6 or 7 years. And now it's a place that people are used to coming down into. We're trying to create those welcoming environments, and we're so anchored in space. Harvest is about 4 blocks wide and 1 block deep. And we're constantly thinking about, how do we go from being a government city most of the time for 1 week or 10 days in this temporary way to be something that's meaningful to folks, helps them get that sense of pride and place, and can help us last until the next year. A lot of times these things are not big production things. We've got huge tents, we've got lots of expensive equipment, all those types of things. But on your right here is a group of volunteers that for the last 25 years have been painting music notes with handmade stencils on the street. They go all around one of the first nights of the festival and put this out, and this is a sign to the city that everything started. So a lot of the little pieces that come together are kind of the people together with this space. I loved earlier hearing that idea from Shannon, like the cities have a spirit and a soul. And a lot of times people feel like Harvest is really when the spirit and the soul of Fredericton come out. Another thing we often think about in space, so we create different venues that have and invite people into them. So we are in charge of making that space welcoming and comfortable. And one of the priorities we've always had is this idea of being able to see amazing international talent, but be very close. Like, this is maybe more close than everybody always gets, but these folks up in the front row are holding an instrument to help the musicians play on it, right? This is from the record company. They played on Saturday night and to a sold out crowd of over 3,000 in our biggest tent. And this idea of closeness brings a lot of what we're trying to do in this space with Harvest. And we hear about it all the time from the artists and from the people that they can't believe how personal it feels and how close it feels. On Saturday night, Friday night, Blue Rodeo came in and they started one song and they didn't sing an entire verse. And that space filling up with noise of people singing and everyone knowing the words. I've heard from so many people that sense of community has been missing in the last couple of years, and they I really needed that. Was something we've heard a lot. So those are the type of interactions we're trying to create within these spaces. A lot of times as an organizing group, so we have about a 15-member volunteer board and 4 full-time staff. We're always looking to how can we help people engage in this space differently or see it differently. And the reality is we can add things to it, but then we have to watch how people interact with it. So on the left-hand side now, this is the nighttime view of that street closure with people dancing to amazing local artists. On the right-hand side, you can see this is just outside of the Craft College. And we've always said, we've had a venue there for a long time. It's an all ages venue. We want young people to be coming out and recognize that this is for you. Well, when it was brick buildings with a tent that was kind of closed off with fencing, it didn't always feel super welcoming. So this year we added different lights, added some space. This should look like a fun, vibrant space, and doing that totally changed the feel inside. So how we're adding art to it is really, really evolving. Even after 32 years, we're constantly in evolution. And seeing how we want the space to be seen can sometimes, I don't know, it's just amazing seeing it come to light. So you can see some lights that we've added, and even we have a lot of brick around us, and kept thinking, we're not a big city, but I love that big city feel of having posters for concerts on the walls. So we did that. And of course, this is a post from Kathleen Edwards. She found her poster up at a couple places and was really loving it. It's those little details that I think make the space feel like it's all together. You can see the purple music note on the ground there too. So it's a little bit of all of these things coming together. This is such a New Brunswick thing to say. In front of the old post office that hasn't been the post office for like 15 years, we put an acoustic stage. This is like one of the best sounding places in Fredericton. This is seen as like a building that no one really knows what's in it anymore because it used to be public and now it's not. but a lot of people spread around here on a beautiful fall night to see someone local perform and hear it all through the downtown. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And we also look at the space in different ways. This is about maybe 100 feet from each other, in the middle of an intersection with a performer who's traveled here and doing absolutely wild feats, so talented with a crowd around them. So bringing this vibrancy into the middle of Queen Street, which is one of the busier streets in Fredericton, shutting down the street and then having stuff like this happening. And then 100 feet away behind historical fencing, beside the craft college, we have almost like a little campfire situation. So those little pockets where everyone can find a space where they feel more comfortable is what we're trying to create. You know, we've been doing this for a long time, so it's almost like the general formula, we've kind of got an idea of it, but these little touches have been the thing that's starting to bring out new audiences. The businesses in the area really love that it feels special, it feels unique, it feels different, and we're looking to continue growing that. Speaking of growth, we have to always think, and as Harvest we have been, that's how we've been around so long, is like, what's the next generation of this? Who's coming afterwards? And I love that idea that I think, Shannon, you were talking about. It's what the kids are going to grow into. So highlighting what music happens here. All of our tips at our festival go towards school music programs. So it's nice to be able to show, here's a school music program and what your money is going towards. This was right in front of City Hall, same place the yoga was. So purposing those in different ways. And the leader of this band, Greg Weber, also is a rock musician who played later that night at a bar, right? So it's such a little community. We're trying to grow the next generation of musicians by having them play, but also having them hear international level music and be like, maybe I can do that. And we've got great examples. On the left here is Keith Hallett. If anyone's a blues fan, he plays his own brand of just amazing blues. The first time I ever saw him, he was with his other 16-year-old buddies in front of a bank in town busking for Harvest. And, you know, 10 plus years later, he's headlining stages here and all around. And on the right-hand side, sorry to Nova Scotia, but David Miles moved back home to Fredericton a couple of, I guess, during the pandemic. And this is a shot from last year. That's our big tent now, right? So international musicians, and David will tell you stories about hanging out outside the tents when he was too young to get in, and knowing this is what music could sound like, and getting a different thing. If you can see it differently, maybe there's an opportunity for some of these young students to eventually be playing on these stages, or as volunteers, or as, you know, community business owners, that kind of thing. So we think a lot about how a festival like ours can change how a community sees itself, right? So about 10 years into the festival, the local YMCA was noticing an increase in volunteers. And they were saying how a lot of people were coming to them and saying, I had never really volunteered before, but then I volunteered at Harvest. And could I volunteer here now? So that idea of creating, you know, that bigger community that can change everything. So earlier, I think it was Kofi in the first session was talking about this idea of like going past, we have to like do everything together and holistically in solidarity. And we want to build cities that are ready to help change everything. And I think that more artists and more volunteers and all of those things are how we're going to not only change the spaces, but change the people and change the way we can deal with other problems. And as we go through here, this is a new volunteer, one of my neighbors who came out with one of those how can I help you signs. And she, like every single other person that did that job this year, was like, sign me up for next year. So we've been changing our spaces to try to drive behavior, but I'll tell you this year, you may have heard about it if you hear anything about Harvest. Our first night was a hard open, but we got feedback immediately on the space. It wasn't working for people. They were used to a flow that they really understood and liked, and they were missing it. So we publicly in the open got feedback and started making changes. There were changes to the big tents every single night. I think we kind of nailed it by the end, but we also recognized that the only reason we were able to do that is because of our relationship. I appreciate how pretty much everyone has talked about that idea of developing relationships as a way to help you make things happen. But our ability to adjust has been completely aligned with these relationships. As an example, we were low on volunteers on Friday and Saturday night. And so our general manager called the local CBC, and during drive when everyone's coming home, so the end of the day, that 4 p.m. radio show, they announced my email. If you can come help, email Meghan. So I got so many messages of people just saying, I heard you need help. We had people showing up at the tents and that kind of thing that want to be in this space, that want to be part of it. Some of them are like, I've never even been to Harvest. I had one person tell me, I moved here 3 days ago. Can I help? And it's just that kind of thing. So we're trying to create a container in which people can figure out how to connect with their community, what they care about, what they love, and be part of this amazing time in Fredericton that feels like so special. And it's amazing to see other things popping up that Harvest has almost opened the door for, and hopefully helps people through as well. It's a lot more than a festival. We have an opportunity to showcase local performers on stages right beside international performers. This was my favorite show from the weekend. Celise loves you in the background on her equipment. It was like a big, amazing love-in of this woman who plays electric guitar and says that she was never supposed to be able to do this. And people look at her like, how did you get this good? And it was absolutely enervating. It made the whole city feel different. And that's what we're looking to do, is give an opportunity for people to connect with something and feel something, and feel joy and dance and be near people they haven't seen in a long time. And we create the space, but the people in the space with the artists are what creates that energy. So it's really, I don't know, it's incredibly exciting. We've seen local musicians open up for other ones, like Ross Nielsen, who is from Fredericton, now lives in Saskatchewan, opened up for Charles Bradley. We had a local band open up before Robert Plant. Like, these opportunities and putting people in the same space together and giving them opportunities to react and see each other is another part of how we're trying to like help art influence how people feel in the spaces. And one last quick story before I sign off here. This is Taz. So Brandon Niederauer, the first time he came to play with us, he was 13 years old. Came with his dad, just a guitar phenom. Well, he was back on Saturday night playing our last big tent show. The third time he's been back. He's 19 now. And we're seeing the same people, just like we do with volunteers and just like we do with our patrons. We're seeing musicians come into our spaces as we evolve, and so do they. And it's such a beautiful connection and relationship between everyone. So I feel super lucky to be in this. And that tent went from that to this. So at midnight last night, this is what our tent looked like. This is our parking lot behind City Hall. And right now it's gone. This tent is completely out of there. And at 7 a.m. tomorrow, people will be parking in this and going back to work and remembering that something happened at Harvest, and hopefully have enough to take it with them. That the city has all those memories, and we'll keep learning from how people are moving in it, how these spaces help people feel connected and included. We ended our day yesterday with William Prince playing and sharing, very personal messages about how he didn't used to feel comfortable in his music talking about reconciliation, but now he felt like it's exactly the right thing to do. And we're starting better conversation with that with our board immediately from that. We left that show saying, all right, what's our next step and how are we going to create more spaces for more voices? So music's a beautiful thing, and the space just gives you a place to make it happen, and the people do the rest.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meghan, for rounding this out and giving us such a beautiful idea of what Harvest Music Festival actually is, because I've never been. Yeah, come on down to New Brunswick. Cool. So we don't have obviously the time that we mentioned to get into a panel, but some of the words that I pulled from everyone's presentations that I wanted to leave folks with today are dream, accessibility, belonging, play, stories, imagine, truth, open heart, space, land, understanding, heal, evolution, First Nations, community, politics, and art. So I want to thank everybody for being here today to dream about what spaces are and can be. And I leave everybody with one idea, which is if you could create your dream art piece out in the world, out in the city streets, out in your favorite place, what might that look like? The first piece to actually doing something is figuring out how it comes to life, how we dream it. So thank you everyone for being with us here today, and some of us will see each other later.
Thank you so much, Kate. An impressive panel. Wow, I love the way that you guys are weaving together the arts and the fabric of the city, the indigenous, the queer, the participatory, utilizing local materials and local people, and the pluralism that we saw in that last discussion. I'm just so impressed how evolved you guys are here. You know, where I'm from in Los Angeles, you see graffiti on the wall, it's a sign of gang activity. Here, it's a positive affirmation reminding you to brush your teeth. It's really, really awesome, and I feel held.